first of all, let's get to grips with how much cash is actually going in real terms to be given to the NHS on top of what it was going to get in the first place.
Well, it looks like it is going to be getting an extra 20 billion a year in 5 years' time, compared with how much it is now. That's a pretty big increase. Depending which bit of the NHS we're talking about, it gets about 120 billion a year now. So 20 billion on top will make a bit of a difference. It's worth saying that it's the kind of scale of increase, even though it sounds huge, it's the kind of scale of increase the NHS was used to getting in the run-up to the crisis 2010. It's much more than it's got since then, but it's not so big by comparison with historical standards.
Well, this is it. It's certainly more than even the Labour Party were offering at the last general election in real terms. And the question is, though, is it enough? Because, as you say, I mean, even in Thatcher's day, this was the sort of increase that it was given. But we got used to these massive increases under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown.
Yeah, you're right on all those fronts. Actually, the Labour Party manifesto was offering really very little to the NHS last year. They had lots of spending commitments, but they were for big new shiny things rather than keeping things like the NHS going. If you look at the period up to 2010, then the increases were enormous. We had the biggest increases in health spending by far in the new Labour years. So what we've got going forward is something which takes the increases back to the sorts of levels they were in the run-up to 1997. Now, it's important to remember in terms of the NHS at the moment that whilst it's beginning to creak, whilst satisfaction levels are beginning to fall and waiting times are beginning to rise, it is enormously better than it was back in 1997. Satisfaction levels are far higher than they were there. Waiting lists are far lower than they were then. So what one hopes will happen is that this increase will, at the very least, stop the NHS getting any worse and keeping it at a level which, whilst not quite as good as it was a few years ago, is still much, much better than it was 20 years ago.
And this is the trouble, isn't it? To keep the NHS at the same standard for another patient turning up at their GP or at A&E with needing an emergency operation, you have to plough billions more cash in because there are more of us. And crucially, we're getting older. And the older people get, certainly over 65, and then crucially, after 80, we start costing an absolute fortune more. I think there was a figure I read the other day that an 85-year-old man costs the NHS 7 times the cost of a 30-year-old man in terms of the average amount of treatment needed. And there are going to be more and more and more 85-year-old men and women.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you look, older people inevitably cost a lot more than younger people. People in their 30s and so on don't tend to go to the doctor very much at all. And the numbers of, as the population increases over the next 20 or 30 years, almost all of that increase will come among old people, and particularly among people over 85. It's not just the number of people, of course. It's also the costs of medicines, the costs of technology. The fact, actually, that the NHS is good at keeping people alive, and therefore they have to come back for more. Actually, keeping people alive is an expensive business.
But this is the funny thing, isn't it? Actually, a lot of these woes for the NHS are actually a result of its successes in keeping us alive. All these treatments that people are no longer dying of these issues. They're living with these chronic problems, sometimes for decades, and that is a huge cost. But it's a cost we should welcome.
Yes, I mean, it is a cost of success. I mean, economists can be a bit miserable when we talk about, people living for longer, and that's terribly expensive.
Damn them.
But actually, of course, it's a good thing that people are living for longer.
Well, indeed. I mean, we must mention, actually, by the way, this is very England-centric because, of course, the NHS is in England is run separately from the other NHSs. So the budget for the NHS England's going 20 billion a year up. There's also 2 billion for the Scottish government to spend, and Wales get 1.2 billion. Hundreds of millions also for the health service in Northern Ireland, although those are devolved parliaments and assemblies, so they get to choose how to spend that cash. They may choose not to spend it on the NHS. Then the question is, how are we going to pay for it? Now, the Prime Minister in her interviews yesterday said, we as a country will contribute a bit more. But she also talked about this £350 million on the side of a big red bus that may be familiar to some people from a couple of years ago at the EU referendum. And she compared that, basically saying, look, actually, I'm going to be giving a lot more than that to the NHS. So now it works out, I think, £600 million gross, but 400, just under 400 net a week. But is this a result of the Brexit dividend?
No, it's not a Brexit dividend. I mean, I mean, she's right. It's about £400 million a week, so it kind of matches that number on the bus. But of course, that number on the bus was always made up. But over this period, there are two reasons why it's not a Brexit dividend. One is a sort of simple bit of arithmetic, which is that there's literally no money there because over this period we're still going to be paying in to the EU, partly as a result of the divorce bill. And on top of that, we're going to, the government has promised to continue paying farmers and social fund payments and so on that the EU has previously paid. So there is, I mean, just as a sort of matter of accounting, the money isn't there. And then the second thing is the government has already accepted that the public finances over this period will be at least £15 billion a year worse off because the economy has already started growing more slowly, and the forecast from the Office of Budget Responsibility, which suggests a relatively modest negative impact from Brexit, tell them that the tax revenues will be lower. So, I mean, the Prime Minister was quite honest in one sense, which he said we will all have to pay a bit more. This is something that will, in the end, come from higher taxes.
Well, there's talk about plans to raise money from freezing all personal allowances. That's basically sort of a drag on it. So you would have expected, hopefully, to actually keep more of your money if you got a pay rise, which you're just not going to be able to keep. Also, national insurance thresholds as well. But realistically, the Times front page is saying there's a £11 billion black hole in her spending plans that haven't been agreed by the Treasury and Department of Health and everybody else. In which case, does that mean that that's the sort of level of sum that can't be raised from a stealth tax here and a stealth tax there? It will actually have to be something going on the basic rate of income tax.
Well, £20 billion is almost certainly too much. If you're going to do it all through tax, then £20 billion is too much to get through so-called stealth taxes. You can't really miss £20 billion just by doing it stealthily.
The Chancellor's not going to find that down the back of the sofa.
Exactly. Now, I mean, obviously, over the short run, they could decide to borrow more. Over the long run, you can't obviously just keep increasing borrowing year after year after year. But if they decide to borrow a bit more over the short run, they could, except that they have a manifesto commitment to get to a balanced budget in the mid-2020s. Now, of course, they and their predecessors have always, in the end, ignored their fiscal rules and failed to meet them, and then created another set of fiscal rules. So that could happen again. But if they want to do it through taxes, then it will be through something that we notice, whether that be higher VAT or income tax or
we will have to, and the load will have to be spread. Of course, a key point, even if it's done from borrowing, the borrowing is paid for by paying the interest. The interest is paid for by taxes. It all comes back to people's money coming out of their pockets, out of their bank accounts towards the government, because people forget governments don't have their own money. Paul Johnson, always a pleasure to speak to you, sir, Director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Thank you very much to him. Let's talk to the Taxpayers Alliance now. James Price is on the line. Good morning to you, James.
Good morning.
Well, you've been listening to what Paul Johnson's had to say. Now, the question is, is this going to be paid for, that Brexit dividend? Look, I mean, I'm a Brexiteer. There ain't a Brexit dividend now. I believe there will be in the future. I think the economists have all been wrong about the doom and gloom from us being an independent nation state and free trading. But there's no question at all, while we're still in the EU and while we're still threatening to pay, divorce bills of 40 billion quid, of course there isn't going to be a Brexit dividend. This is going to have to be paid for somehow. How do you think any extra money in the NHS should be paid for?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, it is theoretically possible that the Prime Minister gets some stonkingly good deal, loads of pro-growth policies, the economy starts going gangbusters again, and these sort of rises pay for itself. And of course, it is also theoretically possible that that doesn't happen and everything goes a little bit wobbly. Well, the one problem I've got with this is the idea that it's just higher taxes and higher borrowing that will pay for this. That seems to be the government and the opposition's answer to absolutely everything these days, rather than looking at efficiency savings and quite positive reforms that could save the NHS absolute billions every single year and improve the quality of service to people.
But, we look at some of the efficiency savings that lots of papers talk about, and, you hear these things where they're buying rubber gloves for £50 instead of £1 and all these things. But when you go through all of these things, They don't total more than a few, a couple of billion a year. This whole patients missing appointments. You're always going to have patients missing appointments. There are lots of reasons why patients miss appointments. Part of it is NHS inefficiency. Is part of it is that people are better now, and it took them so long to get an appointment in the first place. I mean, there are lots of inefficiencies that are just there because you're dealing with the general public, and they're going to be there forever. We're not going to be able to fund the future of the NHS just through being slightly more efficient.
No, that's true. Although that doesn't mean we shouldn't try and do some of these things.
Agreed.
The idea of having a missed GP appointment costs something like 400 quid, and it also makes people not really think about where it is that the NHS is getting its money from. If people started, acting a bit more responsibly with it, maybe that would help. But there is a huge amount. Something like procurement is something that the public sector in general is really bad at doing. You talk about rubber gloves that cost £1 going for 50 quid or whatever. It's sort of 17 pence for a packet of paracetamol in Tesco, or it's several pounds getting it through prescription, things like that. And if you made something like a 1% saving in all procurement costs, that would pay for 4,000 odd junior doctors a year. So we are talking a lot of money here, and it's maybe largely just the idea that we should be able to suggest reforms to what is the closest thing we have in this country to a national religion without being branded as heretics.
Yeah, no,
there are really. Go on, sorry.
No, I completely agree with you. I think that is one of the issues. We need to have a sensible debate about it. It is an extraordinary thing that we have a Prime Minister and a Tory leader who can announce a huge raft of cash for a much-loved British institution like the NHS and still manage to get bad publicity from it, even from Tory-supporting newspapers like The Telegraph and like The Mail. How does she manage it?
Well, it is rather extraordinary because the news is fantastic. The NHS is getting an extra £20 billion a year by 2023 to make sure it can continue to look after us. So this should be an unremitting good news story from every perspective. Of course, the time to set out where all the money's coming from, which is the question that people are asking, is in the budget in November, when all the sort of taxation and government expenditure get laid out in the round. So we'll find out in November exactly where all the money's coming from.
Are you kidding me? You're saying that if Jeremy Corbyn announced an extra £20 billion for the NHS, that you wouldn't be in the first one in the TV and radio studio saying this isn't costed, and they said, well, we're going to wait until November to tell you, and you go, oh, fair enough, fine, of course you would.
Well, I mean, obviously Jeremy Corbyn has a track record of making gigantic unfunded spending commitments far in excess of this. I mean, at the last election, he promised spending commitments about 6 or 7 times higher than this without any idea how to pay for them. Of course, this is the government which over the last 8 years has managed to get Labour's deficit down from £150 billion a year down to £40 billion a year, or from 10% to 2.5% of GDP. So this government has if you're asking for where does the comfort come from that this will be properly funded, well, the comfort comes from the fact that over the last 8 years, this government has been financially responsible. And because of that financial responsibility, which has helped the economy, we are now in a position to put all this money into the NHS. It didn't happen by accident, right? The fact we've got a strong economy, creating lots of jobs, generating tax revenues, is precisely why we can afford to do this. Of course, if Jeremy Corbyn was in charge, he would crash the economy, and that would mean there would not be any money for the NHS because tax revenues would go down.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about tax revenues and all the need to spend, and spend that money on the NHS because it exists. But it was the Prime Minister who basically linked this extra money to Brexit. She referred to that big red bus, the £350 million. This has been called the Brexit dividend. There's no one, even a staunch Brexiteer like myself, who thinks there is a Brexit dividend before 2023 when we're still paying in to the EU. And certainly the Institute of Fiscal Studies, Paul Johnson, was on the show earlier and saying that, this is absolute nonsense. Was it wise of the Prime Minister to link money to the NHS with Brexit?
Well, I think there will be a Brexit dividend by 2023. It won't fund all of this expenditure. By my reckoning, it'll fund somewhere between 40 and 50% of this extra spending increase, because by the time you take off the rebate, take off the money we're going to spend anyway on agriculture and science, and a little bit of divorce payment, won't be much by then, but a bit of divorce payment, you're probably left with around about, I would say, £8 billion a year, which is about 40% of this extra money. So, I think it is fair to refer to a Brexit dividend, but it won't pay for all of it. It'll pay for a pretty good chunk, though.
Okay, and just finally, are your local constituents, are they looking forward to having a tax rise? Because the reality is, the sort of money we're looking at for the NHS, and many of us are very supportive of it, it does actually probably involve tax rises across the board. You can't just tax the top earners.
Well, I'm pretty sure that we're not going to see, well, I hope we're not going to see kind of widespread tax increases, because actually if you put taxes up too far, you actually end up collecting less money because it deters people from working hard. There may be changes in the budget that are required to raise a bit of extra revenue, but we'll find out in November what those are. But the most important thing I think my constituents and I should take from this announcement is that the Conservatives are putting the NHS absolutely at the top of the priority list, and that is exactly where it belongs.
Okay.
Yeah, my twins were born prematurely at 25 weeks 5 years ago, and without the NHS looking after them, in London NHS Hospital, they would have died. So all of us, I'm sure, have experiences like that at one point or another in our lives, and that's why the NHS is so important, and why, when it needs extra money, we're going to make sure it gets provided.
Chris Philp, Tory MP for Croydon South. Thank you very much for joining us. Listening to all that, the Shadow Minister for Health and Social Care, Labour MP Justin Madders. Good morning to you, Justin.
Good morning, Julia.
Well, Chris has basically just told us the NHS is safe in Tory hands. So presumably, you must welcome this extra cash for the NHS.
Well, it's almost as if we're in a bizarre parallel universe where government can say, yes, we're going to spend all this money, but sort of have absolutely no detail on where it's coming from. And we've got to remember as well that this is about 3.4%, which is well below the historical increases that the NHS has
It's
needed.
1.4 percentage points more than the Labour Party was offering at the last general election only a year ago.
Well, we were going to offer 5% this year, actually, as an upfront increase.
In real terms, what the Tories are offering is 3.4%, and in real terms, the Labour Party was offering 2% last year. Things haven't really changed that much in the last year.
Well, we were offering.
Those aren't my figures. Those are the Institute for Fiscal Studies figures.
Yeah. Well, it was. Institute for Fiscal Studies said it was 7.7 billion in the first year, plus an extra 2 billion for social care, and that's one of the main things that actually Chris didn't talk about, which was what's going to happen with social care. Because of course, as we all know, one of the big pressures on the NHS is the fact that so many people are attending at A&E because the social care system is really broken, or they can't get discharged from hospital in time because there's nowhere for them to go. And it's a really, really big issue that has been completely omitted from this. And you can't try and resolve the issues in the NHS without trying to tackle social care at the same time. So I think that's a massive mistake from the government to sort of pretend this is going to solve everything when actually half the system has been left untouched.
Although, of course, the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, is now Health and Social Care Secretary, so that's within his remit. So perhaps, hopefully, and I think there'll be no one who's involved in healthcare and social care who doesn't accept your point there. But do you think it's interesting that the Tories are bringing, should we say, the battleground, or the battle to Labour territory? Traditionally, and polls still show, people trust Labour on the NHS far more than they trust the Tories. Do you think the Tories can prove themselves?
Well, I think since last year's election, there's been a whole series of areas where the Tories have recognised they're in real difficulty and are trying desperately to find ways of making up lost ground. I don't think most people will be taken in by this. I think it's pretty clear that there's going to be nothing new for this winter, and unless there's something pretty dramatic, we're going to have problems again around about January. And the waiting list is up to 4 million now for people waiting for operations. That's gone up 1.5 million in the last 8 years. That could go to 5 million by 2020. Most of this new money isn't going to be getting through the system until then. So actually things are probably going to sort of deteriorate a little bit further before we see any of this money bringing any improvements.
Things are going to get worse before they get better. Now, what should this money be spent on, though? I mean, given that the money will be appearing at some point, there's a lot of people talking about reform. We've been asking people to tweet in, does the NHS need more cash, more reform, or both? There's always these tales people have about how inefficient the NHS is, although pound for pound in terms of outcomes, the NHS is one of the most efficient in the world. We still have a lot worse outcomes than lots of our Western European neighbours who do actually pay an awful lot more of their healthcare. One of the big issues has been a shortage of staff, of clinical staff, and part of that, not all of it, but part of that will be pay. Part of it is working conditions, but much of that will be down to the shortage of staff putting pressure. So is an awful lot of this money, do you think, going to go on pay for nurses, doctors and other clinical staff? And should it?
Well, that's a very good question, because obviously we had an NHS pay settlement announced a few months ago, and it's not clear whether the money that's going to be set aside for that will be included in this, or whether that's additional money. But for me, the workforce issues are probably the biggest challenge the NHS faces. You know, we've got 100,000 vacancies at the moment across the NHS. There's nothing in the announcement yesterday to cover education and training issues within the health service, and really we do need to get a much more sustained plan to actually bring the people through the system that we need to tackle these challenges, because at the moment we're spending billions of pounds a year on agency staff because we don't have the core workforce in the first place. So I think a workforce strategy that is actually credible sitting alongside this would help tremendously.
The current Chief Executive, Rachel Power of the Patient Association, greeted the news of this extra funding by saying the announcement provides enough cash to stabilise the NHS for a while, but it will clearly not be enough to transform the service to meet the changing needs of patients as the population ages and more people live longer with multiple conditions. And this is the issue, isn't it? Whatever amount of money you promise for new money for the NHS, however it's funded, it's never really going to be enough, is it?
No, and I mean, the real criticism at the moment is that Theresa is saying that it's going to be from savings that we're going to have from leaving the EU. And in fact, virtually everybody, her own Office for Budget Responsibility is saying the facts just don't support that, and likewise the Institute of Fiscal Studies. And it seems that, she's anything to divert from the chaos of Brexit is to be welcome. But we're getting further chaos, really, from just about everybody who's obviously it's welcome to have the promise of further money. But, given that it's also being said that currently the NHS is short of some 10 billion, doesn't really help much when you're still waiting years to get units of billions when it's not going to cover what is going on at present. And that's where the commentators who say that reforms, and I hope they're thinking from the bottom up and no more from the top down, which I've seen umpteen of in my career, and none of them have really been a success.
Well, yeah, but this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, we always talk about reform. Like, there is not an organisation on this planet that, or a household or an individual who couldn't tighten up their spending and their costs and reform themselves. But the reality is, when you've got a million people on the payroll and a huge big organisation dealing with crises every day with emergency patients, it gets quite hard to do. But I'm with you in terms of the top-down reforms. But in terms of the amount of money going in, this gives us back to sort of the similar levels to increased levels of spending in real terms per year to what we've seen actually in most of the post-war years. We saw a lot more spending from Blair and Brown, huge amounts of money, of course, huge amounts of borrowing at the time to spend that money. And then, of course, this massive drop-off. And people talk about it was partly a decision by David Cameron. He was leading that coalition government, but actually also it was post-2008 when there was no money. And the NHS is one of the few parts of the government that actually didn't see a funding fall. It actually was ring-fenced. But in terms of the amount of money that we do need and how we do that, I mean, we've got an ageing population. The needs of the NHS are going up so much every single day, just as people age. They're no longer 30, 40, 50, 60. I think in about 10 years' time, something like 23% of the population is going to be over 65. Once you're over 65, the extra costs that you're going to likely burden the NHS with are huge. After 85, quadruple it again. The reality is more people living longer, many with chronic conditions, is going to cost the NHS more and more money. How do we deal with that? Do we have to reform completely? Do we have to start charging for aspects of the NHS? Do we have to start taxing more? What's the answer?
Well, I mean, a combination of all these things, presumably, because, you can't just make money out of the air. You've got to find a place for it to come. And also the current discussion, she hasn't mentioned social care. Yeah. Social care is a huge problem. And this is money for the NHS without mentioning how you're going to do the social care bit, because if you did the social care bit, it will cut down a lot of the pressure on the NHS. I mean, A&Es are swarmed over because there's not sufficient community care. Likewise, beds are blocked. Goodness knows how many who don't need to be there because they can't be moved on back either into their own homes or into residential homes.
And two-thirds of people in hospital in England at any one time are over the age of 65. So this is absolutely vital. This is a crucial issue.
Yeah, of course it is. I mean, many of those could be dealt with in appropriately set up community situations. And we've known this for a long time. But just plucking things out of the air because it's the NHS birthday is not the way to do it.
And do you think a lot of this money will end up going on extra pay, on pay to hire more staff, because there's a massive shortage of staff in the NHS? And I would have thought that although lots of people who leave the NHS don't say, the number one issue is not apparently pay, according to all the surveys, my midwives council and nurses representatives, it's working conditions, it's pressure. I would have thought a lot of that comes from the fact there aren't enough other staff to share the workload out, in which case would spending a lot of this money on hiring more people or paying people a bit more who are already in the job and keeping them for longer, would that actually ease some of the pressure?
Goodness knows, because as you said, the Blair and Brown years, the huge amount, the wages virtually were doubled for doctors at that time. Not quite, but almost.
And nurses' pay went up considerably as well.
It did indeed, and a lot of the money that was thrown at it too was in increased pay, a big chunks of increased pay. I mean, the NHS consultants went up by something like 40%, and their time, because the current then Secretary of State for Health was saying they don't work the hours that they should, and they were given a 48-hour week when they were doing 56, 58 hours anyway, and so they got more money for less hours. I mean, you've got to be... The other thing, Julia, is that there are some 600 different authorities with their fingers in the NHS pie all the time who have to be consulted. Now, that is a ridiculous great bureaucracy when really you're trying to sort out what's going to happen on the ground where the patients need advice and treatment.
Absolutely. Mike Smith, always voice of reason, former chair of the Patients Association. Thank you very much for joining us.